Okay, so we're back in our last scene. Now we've called it Multipass Rendery Module 3 Begin, and I've set it to name things based upon the scene, the layer, the camera, and the version. We're going to be in version 3. So we have our render elements all switched on. Let me just remove that. That was just me practicing. So in our channel box layer editor, we have our master layer and our fog. We're actually going to create a new layer using all our geometry and our camera, but not our lights. And that is going to be our mattes layer. So we don't need to right click. I always want to right click. We're going to go to layers, create a layer from selected, and this layer we're going to call utility. So it's going to be mattes, it's going to be depth of field, it's going to be all that stuff. Now in our render settings you can see that we've now got the utility, fog and master layer, and they all have different settings, certainly independent. So for start, we don't need any of this stuff, any of this beauty stuff in the utility layer. So we're going to just render mattes. Now it will render the RGB. There is a way to make it not do that, but I'm just going to let it do that for the moment. Now because we're not rendering the actual, we don't care about the beauty, the actual render itself, we just want mattes and so on, we don't really need to calculate GI. So if I right click here, so now I will actually right click, we can see create layer override and switch that off. So we won't even calculate GI, which means we'll be able to render very fast. Back in our render elements, we can try setting something up. So here's a material ID. Oops, didn't want to do that. I need a material ID. So material ID, there we go. So the material ID doesn't actually allow you very much in the way of settings, because it obtains its information not from within the material ID node, but actually from within the object, the materials itself. So if I go to my glass material, here we are, and I go down to extra attributes, extra V-Ray attributes, extra V-Ray attributes, we have a material ID and a multimatte ID. So what I do is I go into my material and I can assign it a color within the material ID tab, or I can apply a multimatte ID number. When we look at multimattes, you'll see how that works. So you can give it a number, or you can give it a color. You can use any color on the color picker, but obviously you want very strong colors so they're easy to key. So the material ID, you could in theory have lots and lots of mattes, but the reality is that if you put too many in one layer, and they become difficult to key as they start to get subtle values in the anti-aliasing or in the reflections and so forth, they become less and less useful. So you shouldn't really be needing to key them as such. The compositor should just shuffle the channel. So I would always look at mattes as being pure colors, pure red, pure green, pure blue. So that's why I actually like multimatte ID. Now if I hit render, so I've done the same before I hit render. We've done the same in other materials. We've done the same in the whiskey material. So if I just use the up arrow, you can see, there we are, the up arrow. Let's find our bottle. There's our whiskey material, and we have a red in the material ID and a multimatte ID of 1. So when I hit render, it will use those colors, that red for the whiskey. So the RGB will look rubbish because we've switched off GI. We don't care. We go here, and you can see we've got red for the whiskey, green for the bottle, and the blue for the bottle cap. So I've actually done exactly the same thing in the cap. And if you find the cap material, you can see that the material ID is blue. So you don't set these up within the render layer, you set them up within the materials themselves. Now I've also set these numbers. You saw 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3. And that's for multimatte, which is a different way of setting up the exact same thing. So we have the problem, we can't see the whiskey within the bottle because it's not refracting. So again, we can go to our bottle, we can go to our glass material, and in our refraction advanced, we can also create another layer override. Create layer override on that setting, and all channels. And we want to do the same with the whiskey itself, because we want the whiskey also to reflect and refract things. So that is setting to all channels. There we are. There we go. So actually that was why our whiskey was looking a little bit different in our render. So I've found myself a little gotcha. If I go back to my master layer, I can set that to be color only. So in our utility it will affect all channels. That way we won't have that discrepancy that we saw within the whiskey, or I saw. Now, if I hit render again, we should start to see whiskey within the bottle. There we go. So if we just look at the red channel, we can see just the whiskey. If we just look at the green channel, we can see just the glass material. And if we just look at the blue channel, we can just see the cap material. So I'm going to rename this layer to be glass whiskey cap matte. So that's what that'll be called. Now really, if I were continuing on from the demo scene, I would make sure that name is consistent. The important thing is that you set a naming convention. You know, I'm just putting the name of the RGB in order and then the kind of matte that it is at the end. Now that naming it here is changing the name of the actual render element itself, because I have get name from node. You can also affect the names within here, the file name suffix. So instead you could leave this at its default name and change all your names here. If you're using that method, it can be also very helpful if you're using certain scripts and so forth, but when you're doing it manually, I find it a little bit easier to do it here. So there's not a right or wrong here, but there are options. Okay, so that's a material ID.